While Washington was focused on tariffs and trade threats, Canada was quietly making one of its most significant diplomatic and economic moves in decades. Not through confrontation, not through escalation, but through a carefully planned, high-level mission to the heart of the world's second-largest economy. What just happened in Beijing was not a routine trade visit. And once you understand who was in the room and what was agreed, you will see exactly why this moment matters. Let's start with the people involved, because the composition of this delegation tells you everything about how seriously Canada is taking this strategic shift. Leading the mission was Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne. Alongside him, Bank of Canada, Governor Tiff Macklem, the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, Peter Routledge, and the CEOs of Manulife, Sun Life, and representatives from Canada's major banks, some of which have been operating in the Chinese market for over a century. On the Chinese side, Champagne held bilateral meetings with Vice Premier He Lifeng and China's Finance Minister Lan Foan. When you have the Governor of the Bank of Canada, the heads of major financial institutions, and senior Chinese government leadership all sitting in the same set of discussions. This is not diplomacy in the traditional sense. This is institutional alignment. And institutional alignment is where long-term economic direction actually gets decided. Now let's talk about what came out of these meetings, because the outcomes are concrete and significant. First, Canada and China signed a joint statement at the conclusion of the first-ever Canada-China Financial Working Group in Beijing. Both countries committed to deepening financial sector ties, holding frequent exchanges, and scheduling another working group meeting later this year. Second, Canadian banks are now in discussions to receive additional licenses to offer a wider range of financial services inside China. Canadian institutions are also being given greater access to Chinese bond markets. Third, and this is important, Finance Minister Champagne officially invited Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng to visit Canada in the fall to continue building on this progress. That last point matters enormously, because when the other side agrees to come to your table, it confirms the relationship is moving in one direction, forward. To understand why this visit is happening now, you need to understand the broader strategy that Mark Carney has been executing since taking office. When Carney met Chinese President Xi Jinping in Beijing in January, the first visit by a Canadian leader since 2017, he ended a years-long freeze in relations and set a bold target: increase Canadian exports to China by 50% by 2030. That January visit produced an immediate agreement. Canada reduced its tariff on Chinese electric vehicles from 100% down to just 6.1%, allowing up to 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada annually. In return, China removed or reduced its tariffs on Canadian canola products and seafood. That was the opening move. The Beijing financial mission this week is the follow-through. Carney's framework, which he calls principled pragmatism, is built on a simple but powerful idea. Engage where interests align, hold firm where they do not, and always show up. As Champagne put it directly, you cannot expect more trade if you do not show up. Showing up is half the work. Now here is a dimension of this story that most people overlook entirely, and it is arguably the most important one. The focus of this mission was not resource exports, not energy, not agriculture. It was financial services. Why does that matter? Because financial services are the infrastructure of trade itself. Before any goods cross any border, banks process the transactions, insurance companies manage the risk, and financial institutions provide the capital that makes everything else possible. By expanding the presence of Canadian banks and insurers inside the Chinese financial system, Canada is not just increasing trade volumes, Canada is embedding itself into the systems that facilitate trade at a foundational level. That creates influence that goes far beyond any single deal or any single shipment. It creates relationships, access, and leverage that compound over time. This is precisely why Champagne brought the governor of the Bank of Canada on this trip, not just as a symbolic gesture, but as a signal to Chinese counterparts that Canada's commitment operates at the highest level of its financial architecture. None of this is happening in isolation. Trump's trade war has fundamentally disrupted the assumptions that governed global economic relationships for the past 4 decades. Long-standing allies have been pressured with tariffs. Predictability has been replaced with confrontation. And countries around the world are being forced to recalculate their economic dependencies. Canada is not the only country responding this way. As Champagne noted, every one of his G7 counterparts has found a strategic way to engage with China. But Canada's approach stands out because it is not reactive or improvised. It is part of a deliberate, multi-year framework that Carney has been building since day one. One that includes deeper ties with Europe, a new defense partnership with South Korea, participation in the EU's Safe Defense Program, and now accelerating financial integration with China. Carney's stated goal is to double Canada's non-US trade by 2035. That is not a slogan. That is a structural repositioning of the Canadian economy, one that would fundamentally reduce dependence on any single trading relationship. Now, this is Canada 24/7, and we go beyond the headlines. So let's also be clear about the challenges. Pork tariffs imposed by China on Canadian products remain in place after this visit. Issues around canola oil and seafood are not fully resolved. And the relationship between Canada and China still carries significant tensions around forced labor in supply chains, around differences in political values, and around the security concerns that led to years of diplomatic friction in the first place. Champagne was direct about this. Engaging with eyes wide open means being clear about where cooperation is possible and equally clear about where it is not. Canada is not replacing one dependency with another. It is building a more diverse, more resilient set of economic relationships, with China as one important piece of a much larger picture. What we are witnessing right now is a Canada that is moving with purpose and with strategy, not reacting to the world, reshaping its position within it. The Beijing mission this week was not a symbolic gesture. It was a concrete step in a deliberate plan, one that is now producing signed agreements, new banking licenses, deeper financial access, and an invitation for China's vice premier to come to Canada later this year. While Washington continues to operate through pressure and unpredictability, Canada is choosing coordination, diversification, and long-term positioning. That contrast is becoming more visible by the week, and its consequences will shape Canada's economic future for years to come. On Canada 24/7, we will keep tracking every development as this story continues to unfold. If this analysis gave you a clearer picture of what is really happening, subscribe to Canada 24/7. Hit the notification bell and share this with someone who needs to understand where Canada is heading. We go beyond the headlines, so you understand not just the news, but the forces shaping it.